Hey everyone, welcome back to the Four Horsemen Show. Today we are diving into a deep topic, democracy and election 2024. It has been an election-packed year across the globe. We have had the Bangladesh kicking things off in January, then Pakistan in February, Sri Lanka coming up right in September, and India's election stretching from April to June. And of course, the US election is right about the corner in this November. So let's start discussing about how elections are happening and how it can affect our lives.
Exactly. The US elections are just around the corner in November, and the US elections often set trends that ripple across the globe, I believe. We have to be mindful of the impact it can have, especially with such a large diaspora from our countries playing a role in shaping that outcome as well. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, how can we make our democracies even stronger?
Exactly, Natasha. Whether it's trade, foreign policy, climate agreements, or diplomacy, the US elections influence what happens back in our own countries. So it's important to keep an eye on who's running, what they stand for, and how their policies could shape our futures. And the answer may not just lie in looking at the US, but also in reflecting on our own systems and working together as a region. The more we strengthen democratic participation, the more we can ensure a brighter future for all of us, I feel.
Definitely. And today I think we should also talk about these connections, also explore how democracy itself is evolving across these parts with the elections as well, and the human rights, and also the role of different stakeholders like media and technology into these elections, and eventually the democracy itself. So, yeah, let's dive in.
We are absolutely thrilled and honored to have two incredible guests joining us for what promises to be deeply insightful discussion about the US 2024 election and its impact on a global scale. We would like to give a special thanks to Rob Anderson, Chief of Public Engagement Unit from US Embassy of India, Mumbai, for inviting the Four Horsemen Show to interview this distinguished guest who are visiting our region. And please give a warm welcome to our two distinguished guests, Dashieka Ruffin and Alison Williams. So, Dashieka Ruffin is a leading Democrat and the founder of DMR Strategics LLC, a consulting firm focused on grassroots, electoral, and issue-based campaigns. With over 20 years of experience, he has played key roles in major campaigns like Obama for America and Hillary for America. And another guest is for Alison Williams, a Republican. She is a strategic planning consultant with a background as chief of staff for former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. She oversaw policy development and led the state's first women's commission in 50 years, providing recommendations to support women's workforce participation. Thank you both for being here today, and let's begin by diving into the pivotal proposals and ideas that will define the US 2024 election.
We have seen challenge with voter registration, giving them access and voter participation as well. If you see in last election also we had only 70% participation of the voters.
Yeah.
So how you see it as a ballot access has been also critical issue in I think USA.
Absolutely.
So what are your views in that and how us can learn from that too?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be talking about the elections. My view on ballot access is, as a country with the longest democracy, we should be making it easier for people to vote, not harder. And there's a lot of things that we do well in the United States. Voting is not always the thing that we do well, right? And so in order to have a very strong democracy, we have to have varying perspectives. Like everyone has to have equal access to be able to participate in order to have a strong democracy. And so what we're seeing in this election and previous elections, when we have extremely large turnouts, and so 2018, 2020, and 2022 were the biggest turnout elections for us in the United States. However, when I say biggest turnouts, what do you really think? What do you think the percentage is? You think it's a really high percentage? The highest percentage of voter turnout in the United States was in 2020, and it was only 66%.
Oh.
Right, compared to what's happening in India, you guys have a larger percentage that comes out to vote. So why is that? Well, one, unlike in India, for when you all received your independence, women automatically have the right to vote, right? That's not true in the United States, right? And so women didn't get the right to vote until around the 1920s, around that area. Black women and Black people didn't get the right to vote by law. There were opportunities for people to vote, but it wasn't codified until about 1965, right? So where you have a large population based on gender and race that were excluded from being able to participate in the process, you're not going to have extremely high turnouts, right? Because everyone can't participate. What we have traditionally seen is when there's large turnouts, which we should celebrate, a lot of times there are repercussions to that. And where some people who might not want the larger turnouts for everyone to participate come up with rules that make it harder. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of these voter restriction bills that came out. So like I said, in 2020, when we had the largest voter turnout of 66%, we also saw the largest amount of laws that came out of both Congress and the state legislature across the states to restrict voting. And so we see things like voter ID laws, right? It sounds like a very simple thing, like everyone should have an ID. However, not everyone drives. Not everyone has the means to be able to pay for ID because those IDs actually cost money. They're not free. And so if you don't have an ID, you can't vote, right? Then there's things with college students, right? A lot of times they don't have a car. And so their ID comes from their university. Well, in some cases, some of those IDs are not valid mechanisms in order to be able to vote. And so when you have things like voter ID laws, where you have governments that are removing people from ballot access and on the ballot rolls, which you have to be on the ballot roll in order to vote. Then there's other intimidation processes, right? So in a state like Georgia, which is in the southern part of the United States, a lot of times it can take me 8 hours to vote, right? 8 hours. Now, I don't know about you, most people don't have 8 hours just to spare on an everyday basis when you have to go to work or school or take care of your kids, right? And in states like mine, we're voting on machines that are, by definition, old enough to vote themselves, meaning if they were a person, they would be 18 and older, right? And so sometimes those machines, they don't work. So you have a large amount of people who come to vote and they're met with machines that do not work, and not enough machines for the population, right? And so in terms of voting, with India being the largest democracy, we actually can learn a thing or two from you all, right? You guys had this just amazing historic election with voter turnout breaking records, world records, right? And so one of the things that I admire about you all, you make it easier per capita for voting machines, right? So there has to be a voting machine within 1.5 miles of where people work or live, right? We don't do that. Our election commission also don't go to the people where they are, right? In mountains and rural areas. And so sometimes there might be a 5-mile distance between where someone lives and where they vote. Well, if you don't have transportation, it makes it harder. So my thoughts on this is we have a long way to go when it comes to making sure that everyone has free access to the ballot and making sure everyone can participate. We've had some strives, but I think the more people turn out to vote because they're realizing how much political power that they have just by casting a ballot, that they can become the change that they want to see in this world, the more, unfortunately, opposition is going to be met with them. And so people are realizing that they're not letting it deter them. We're seeing energy on the ground like we've never seen, close to like 2008 when President Obama was elected. And so I think we're going to continue seeing that energy, but we're also going to see continued restrictions on the right to vote.
It's a very huge information. I didn't know that.
It's
So
a lot.
I can say that India, we had done the water ballot access very good, because the reason is that I belong to one of the district here, Junagadh, and for only one people, okay, entire booth has been set it up. It's a 20 to 25 mile inside the jungle, and only one voter is there. For him also, from last like 20 to 25 years, each and every election officer go and take out their vote, because that, as you said, each and every vote counts, regardless of religion, race, and the things.
And I saw news stories where the voter commission was going into the mountains to make sure that people go, or the islands, you know, or the beach countries,
in the boards.
Yeah, exactly.
Elections have been one of the most trending topics in this year, if not the most. And we have had elections in India and Pakistan in the recent past. We're having one in Sri Lanka as we speak, I think. And we've had one in Bangladesh in the beginning of the year, but that government is ousted already. So in 2024, there's another buzzword that has been blowing in the wind, and that is artificial intelligence. And I think we all get that question about AI, so today is going to be no different. So Alison, what do you think about the potential impact and debate around the applications of AI in elections and the overall concept of democracy?
I think it's going to have a huge impact, both positively and negatively. Certainly, AI makes it easier for misinformation and disinformation to be spread. But my view is that we should be embracing AI, and we should be encouraging the use of it to either gather more information or to synthesize data in a way that is not necessarily always fairly presented by the media. And so I do think AI will be a big part of it, but rather than saying we're not going to use this, and we see this in the education system a lot, we are not going to allow the use of AI. It's like saying we're not going to allow the use of a calculator for complex math problems or even basic math problems, because I think anymore, it helps to know what 4 + 3 equals, but to get to the higher math, it's more important to understand the logic and the analysis behind it. And so treating AI as a tool and not the be-all end-all, I think, is a better way to go about it. And to figure out how to use AI not just to combat misinformation and disinformation, but to encourage citizens to engage with candidates in a new and unique way.
News about one particular party or other particular party who is spending much amount in the advertising. So the more and more they are spending on the advertising, more and more their users are being trained to watch them and get that perception. So do you think, is it fair?
I do. Absolutely, I think it's fair. And I think it's critical to free speech in the way that we view free speech in America. I want people to have the ability to say, even when it's wrong, I don't like disinformation, I don't like misinformation, but I think it gives an opportunity for the other side to come back and say, you may have seen this, here's the other side. And I think I view those as opportunities. I'm more concerned about international and foreign influence in the election, where there are other state actors or state-sponsored actors who are trying to tell Americans how to think. I would never deign to tell an Indian how to think about the elections here, and I would hope that they would respect, other countries would respect, not that I don't mean to suggest that India is engaged in foreign influence, but I would hope that other countries and other state actors would respect that Americans should be able to conduct their own elections without the fear of foreign influence. So I do think that that advertisements and social media is so ubiquitous anymore. Traditional media in America is declining. We are seeing a little bit of a resurgence, but the traditional media is declining, and so we have to find other ways to reach voters.
Nice. So very huge information, chunk of information, and you have very in-depth knowledge about that.
So, as powerful as it is, AI have been changing the face of political advertisement as well, like all other industries out there. And it has been revolutionizing, to be honest. And since it's a global and democratic tool, so it can be powerful in both ways. And we have talked about one side of AI, I think, so far, and probably there is another side too. So, Deshika, do you want to touch a bit about what you think about the potential, controversies and probably other things that you think about AI as well?
There are some really good things and there's some really bad things, right? And this is when you kind of get into the negative aspect of AI. So while there are a lot of benefits because it helps people communicate faster and efficiently, it also makes mechanism for disinformation even more faster, right? And so similar to the deep fakes that you just mentioned, we're seeing that all over in the U.S. elections. It happened before this election, but it's very prevalent and sophisticated this election. We've seen images and robocalls, which is when you get a call and it kind of disseminates to voters, purporting to be President Biden saying, hey, for our primary day, which is before the general election, don't go vote. We don't need your vote, right? Or telling people, guess what? I want your vote. Make sure you vote on November the 6th. Well, the election is November 5th, right? And so, and this disseminates large mass. So people are thinking like, okay, well, this is a friendly reminder. Of course, I'm going to trust this, right? And so we, as technology advances, policy hasn't quite kept up with the advancement of technology. We have to be able to regulate this because this is just a start. We're going to see even more videos. So one of the benefits of AI, and we talked about advertising and communicating in political campaigns. Before, when you wanted to cut a video, it was a process. You had to hire a firm or do it in-house. It might take a couple days. As you know, as a podcast, you have to do the editing and all of that. Well, AI, you can literally go to ChatGPT, write a prompt, and it creates the video for you, right? In the matter of minutes. And so imagine you having that at your disposal to communicate in a negative way, right? And how dangerous that can be. And so while we are prepared for the use of deep fakes and the negative aspects of AI in this election, it is a story that is constantly being talked about over and over. So I think people are ready, but I don't think people really appreciate how far spread it actually is, right? And so we're getting there. There's regulations that are coming, but I think to Alison's point, people are becoming a lot more sophisticated in identifying those fakes.
Mm-hmm.
When it is campaigning and when it is a time of actually governing, both are different. Okay, we have seen in all of our 4 countries that we are from. Okay, we have the promises during the campaign. We have some promises. Okay, and when the governing time comes, okay, those have been neglected or those have been ignored. So how US candidates balance that out?
Mm-hmm. I think it probably is very much the same as here. Certainly, candidates make aspirational campaign promises, things that some of them they can control personally and directly, and others that require much more coalition building. And I mean that in terms of the executive branch and the legislative branch working together. And so we do see this a lot. People get disappointed that their candidate has not fulfilled every promise that they made on the campaign trail. And some of that may be intentional, and some of it may just be the fact that governing is so complicated. Moving and getting support, majority support for something is much more complicated than it sounds. I do think where there's a lot of tension that is unnecessary is in governing bodies that don't respect the perspective of the campaign and vice versa, where the only way to view the success of an elected official is through campaign promises, and also to suggest that once you get in office, there is no need to further raise money and make additional campaign promises that are important to your constituency and to your political base as well. And so it is very different. The structures are different. The purpose is different. We also see that a lot of campaign staff is very loyal and committed to winning. They love the competition of it. And when you get into governing, cooperation becomes so much more important. And that is a very hard thing. I don't campaign much because I can't make that switch as quickly. My strong preference is always to work with others, and so I can be more effective on the governing side. And those politicians that make that transition well are the ones who are the most successful.
So, Dashieka, with diversity, equity, and inclusion being such important issues in this election, how do you think the debate around AI is influencing the voter behavior in the US?
Absolutely. So when we talked about democracy earlier, it's about making sure that as many people have the same access to opportunities, right, to be able to participate in the system. And so you're seeing that come to play in conversations around this election. When we talk about voter access to ballot, right, making sure that everyone can vote. But also when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, for the first time, we have a Black woman of Indian descent, right? Who is challenging for the highest office in the land, right? And so we want to make sure that the governing bodies in the US, right, when we talk about the branches of government, but also in every branch, local branches, actually represent and look like the United States, right? We are a diverse country, right? And for so long, our leaders have been white males, right? And so we're finally getting to the point where our voter base is diverse, right? And and our representation is starting to match that as well. So I think you're going to see it play out. I'm hoping that the election goes our way.
So, given the importance of South Asian relations, how do y'all envision your party's policies fostering stronger ties between Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan? What specific initiative would your administration pursue to enhance collaboration in this region and promote progress for these countries as well as for the US?
Right. I think there's going to be a continuation of cooperation, shared learning. You all are an economic power alliance for us, and I think that will continue under both administrations and hopefully continues to grow. And so I think that we'll continue enjoying a very friendly, cooperative, and mutually beneficial relationship.
And I totally agree. Both the economic influence that each of those countries have in this region, the defense relationships that the United States has with each of those countries, these are significant relationships that don't go away depending on the presidency.
Absolutely.
That would be good. Okay. Thank you both of Dashieka and Alison for sharing such a valuable insight today. And it's fascinating to see that two different Democrat and Republicans sitting together, and we all four from different countries sitting together and still discussing about the progress of our countries. So thank you for your time, and I hope we will see you next time. When any of you are winning, so let's have one interview after that. Awesome. Thank you. A mythology kind of guy. So he come up with the name the Four Horsemen. Four Horsemen means before the apocalypse, there will be
Yes,
yes,
that makes sense. Okay.
Yes, so,
Well, we hope there's no apocalypse.
Right.
yeah.
Oh, this has been such a fascinating conversation, guys. We have got how democracy is being shaped across the South Asia and how the US election could ripple across our borders. And when we look at the voter turnout, it's pretty revealing. In the last election, India had a 65% voter turnout, while Pakistan has 48% and Bangladesh is just 40%. This number shows that while democracy is alive and kicking in our part of the world, there is still room for improvement when it comes to citizens' engagement in the election, because the more and more people will vote, the more and more power they can create. So that's what my thoughts are.
I think it's fascinating to consider how South Asia, with its vast democratic reach, can set global example. Just imagine the four of our countries being, the powerful democracy, creating a democratic region. And also, I would like to bring to attention the women participation. Women participation is a key area for improvement. While India has made progress, there is still much work that's needed in South Asia to boost women's participation in the voting process, in the elections. Despite progress, women in Pakistan often still face challenges such as limited access to voting facilities and social barriers that can hinder their electoral involvement. By empowering women in electoral systems, I think we can make our democracies more inclusive and representative of all voices. What do you think, Taira?
Absolutely, Natasha. Sri Lanka has seen progress in women's participation, but there's still more work to be done. While women make up over 50% of the electorate, and we were the first country in the world to have a female prime minister, our political representation and leadership roles for women still remain low. Although I have to say, we've observed a steady increase in women voters and more advocacy for gender equality, which is promising. Let's take this year's presidential elections, for instance. Sri Lanka appointed a female prime minister and a governor. Voter turnout in Sri Lanka has been strong. So, with about 83% in the 2019 presidential elections, reflecting a solid democratic engagement. And it's worth mentioning South Asia has seen its fair share of pioneering female leaders. As I mentioned earlier, Sirimavo Bandaranayake of Sri Lanka becoming the world's first female prime minister in 1960, and her daughter Chandrika Bandaranayake becoming the president of Sri Lanka years later. And I have to mention Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, who was appointed days ago as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, a female Prime Minister we see stepping in after 24 years.
Indeed, Tahira, it's just so fascinating to see all of our countries have had female prime ministers, each with their own impact, obviously. It could be bad or good. Pakistan had Benazir Bhutto, India had Indira Gandhi, Bangladesh had Sheikh Hasina and Khalida Zia.
While other democratic nations like the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany have elected women in top positions, apart from our countries, of course, the US has yet to have a female president as of now. And we all know that Kamala Harris is a notable candidate in the run this year in this context, but would the US have its first female president? So that is, I think, is the burning question here. Or on the technology front, South Asia could leverage digital innovations to boost voter participation and transparency in our elections. Embracing these tools might help us make our electoral processes more inclusive and efficient, and of course, transparent.
True, Minas. So that's a wrap for today. What are your thoughts on election processes in your country? How can they be improved? And do you think that US will have its first female president soon? Share your views. And thank you for tuning in to the Four Horsemen Show. Until then, stay informed and keep the conversation going.